In other words, men's status and psychological standing with themselves and other people is predicated on their ability to embody objective reality. This apparatus, which is very sophisticated, is functionally understood as masculinity. So masculinity is that which embodies objective reality. Objective reality, as it is antithetical to the postmodernist critique, is untenable to Marxists, just as it is untenable to feminists, as I explained earlier in the video. Now, the reason I think this feminine resentment for objective frameworks, and in this case masculinity, as you can see, there is a departure between femininity and masculinity clearly in this graph. The reason I think that's the same, technically speaking, as the resentment Marxism has for reality is because just as Marxism perverts and bastardizes notions of merit and competence-based hierarchies, claiming that those things don't exist, it's all corrupt, and there is only power disparities between people, so does feminism say there is no such thing as just, competent, generous, productive masculinity. There is only the tyrannical king archetype, the dictator, the corrupt side of masculinity that is authoritarian and predatory. As you can see, these two critiques are very similar. Both are wrong, but both are driven by the same resentment for order, the same resentment for parameters of truth, parameters of objectivity and coherence. The radicalization of women in America has been and is becoming an increasingly serious problem, as there is a population which, as data shows, is rejecting reality at a record rate. Very similar to the population collapse crisis, few people are talking about it, but the crisis poses an existential threat to civilization. The purpose of this video is to explain why this is happening in detail so that we can find a way of interfacing women with reality. The alternative is living in a world where half the voting populace holds civilization hostage out of pure opposition and resentment to all things coherent, reasoned, objective, moral, also known as truth. If this kind of opposition sounds familiar, that's because the description of the anti-coherent female psychopathy gripping the minds of millions is identical to the claims made in postmodern neo-Marxism, the ideology of the left. This channel is already outside the reach in terms of an intellectual understanding of most people who are gripped by the ideology of Marxism because they've been instantiated in not only the antithesis to thinking, but the demonization of explaining ideas in depth to begin with. So already what I'm doing is considered oppressive because it's engaging in objective frameworks rather than the corrupt, incongruent constructs of the left-wing ideology which purports to grant counterfeit virtue. That all, of course, though, doesn't change this graph, which clearly shows that over the progression of my lifetime, I was born in 2001, women have become increasingly insane. In fact, if you look at 2001, the year I was born, it looked like women had become a little bit more connected to masculinity, the masculine apparatus, which I'll talk about a bit later in this video. And then since the year I was born, it just sort of took a massive uptick. I guess that energy of Abraham, the vibrations of Abraham upon the earth did this. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, the reason I think this is happening is due to the manifestation of Marxist resentment in the culture, taking hold much more fearless, less reserved way than the world has ever seen before. Marxist resentment, for those of you who don't know, and I have many videos going into depth on Marxism, but I'll give you a short, brief, simple rundown here. Marxism holds ultimate contempt for notions of objectivity, for notions of truth, for frameworks that distinguish between better and worse, coherent and incoherent, because under their thesis, anything that is coherent is inherently oppressive because it discriminates between categories of existence, such as better and worse. And this is the reason why the postmodern critique of literature is that there is no better and worse ways of interpreting narratives because all narratives are equal. This is actually not only a terrible way of interpreting literature, but also a technically wrong way of viewing the world, considering that reality is objective and therefore everything is comprehensible from reality. And so certain ways of viewing the world are in fact inferior than other ways. This, though, is completely lost on these women who have actually not only internalized the antithesis to what I just said, but are holding resentment towards any person who speaks it. And so just as the left has become increasingly insane going off the rails, we saw Cenk Uygur, the owner of the biggest left-wing social media platform, reference this recently. They've become, just as they've become more insane, and the right has had to counteract this by being dragged to the middle and essentially having to harbor all the free thinkers, the intellectuals, the serious minds, and engaging in pretty much all the dialogue themselves, considering the left has become insane, we see that women have been doing the same thing in direct proportion to this political movement, and men have been dragged to the middle where, or in this case, are having to carry the weight of this population that has labeled dialogue, discourse, reason, objectivity, rationality as inherently oppressive, discriminatory, and other incorrect slander terminology. So, in other words, men have had to become more competent, and this is the reason why in this last election we saw men voting for one side at record numbers and women voting at the other side for record numbers, whereas we saw men valuing things like safety, security, logic, reason, rationality, meritocracy, the rejection of Marxism, the rejection of communism. We saw women embrace lawlessness, the antithesis to meritocracy, open warfare on free markets, emotional demonization of any person that doesn't agree with them, and making things up as well that just simply don't exist. Now, the reason I think this feminine resentment for objective frameworks, and in this case masculinity, as you can see, there's a departure between femininity and masculinity clearly in this graph. The reason I think that's the same, technically speaking, as the resentment Marxism has for reality is because just as Marxism perverts and bastardizes notions of merit and competence-based hierarchies, claiming that those things don't exist, it's all corrupt, and there is only power disparities between people, so does feminism say there is no such thing as just competent, generous, productive masculinity. There is only the tyrannical king archetype, the dictator, the corrupt side of masculinity that is authoritarian and predatory. As you can see, these two critiques are very similar. Both are wrong, but both are driven by the same resentment for order, the same resentment for parameters of truth, parameters of objectivity and coherence. I've been noticing this for a long time, probably since I was 20 years old, 21 years old, that this architecture was taking place. It became very clear, of course, when feminism, in alignment with the left, declared open warfare on masculinity and resulted in the rise of characters or superheroes embodying the archetypes of masculinity to a degree the planet has never seen in sometimes entertaining ways, like Andrew Tate, or take your pick of other men that, filled that demand where men were saying, okay, there is universal warfare across the board from every single movie to TV show to big text. Masculinity is slandered. It is no coincidence that women voting left is directly associated with the warfare on masculinity, because masculinity, and I said I would get to this part earlier in the video, masculinity is an apparatus for embodying objective reality. Men, we all know this because to some extent, to compete in the world, which you have to do to be relevant on some level, it doesn't matter what the hierarchy is. It could be plumbing, it could be welding, it could be trying to get better grades than your peers at school so that you can have a better job, so you can get the position, get paid more, have more status, get the partner that you want, etc. The extrapolation can continue infinitely. In order to compete with each other, we have to engage in objective reality, because to believe wrong things puts us at a disadvantage, meaning that all men know we have to care about logic, reason, and rationality to some extent, and the men that don't are immediately either removed from the game or become low status and unvaluable permanently. Being removed from the game, an example of that would be going to jail. If you are not able as a man to control your emotions and remain rational and logical, you very quickly go to jail, because that's where emotional men go. The psychological literature on that is very clear and interesting. Similarly, if you say, I would rather not compete with men because the entire game, I'm not even going to engage with it for whatever reason, I'm above it, whatever reason you tell yourself, you immediately are viewed as a loser permanently by society. Other men do not look at you as useful, and you're removed from the game of merit. In other words, men's status and psychological standing with themselves and other people is predicated on their ability to embody objective reality. This apparatus, which is very sophisticated, is functionally understood as masculinity. So masculinity is that which embodies objective reality. Objective reality, as it is antithetical to the postmodernist critique, is untenable to Marxists, just as it is untenable to feminists, as I explained earlier in the video. So if you guys appreciate this analysis, this channel is demonetized because YouTube doesn't like truth very much. I'm a small channel, but I've already been demonetized. So go to abrahambeier.locals.com, scroll down and press become a member, and subscribe for less than the cost of a donut. And I'd appreciate that. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time, and thanks for watching.